All right, good evening. Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for our conversations with CKG Cultivating Resilience. I'm Susan Lindsay, Director of Programs with the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation, and this is part of our Conversations with CKG discussion series, a community platform which seeks to take the whispered hidden conversations about mental health into open, supportive educational dialogue. Thank you to Haley Dalton, who will be managing the chat and Q&A this evening. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A feature. We ask that you use this to ask your questions. It just makes it a whole lot easier for us to see your questions if you put them in the Q&A. Sometimes if there's lots of comments in the chat, they can get lost among the comments. We will do our very best to get to as many questions as we can within the hour. A recording of tonight's conversation will be available on ckgconnections.com. We are joined by licensed marriage and family therapist Ashley Morgan Soukup with Summit Emotional Health. Ashley works with children, adolescents, and adults specializing in post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma, marital concerns, anxiety, depression, ADHD, substance abuse, and behavioral concerns. Specifically, Ashley assists individuals and families in exploring new patterns of communication and relational engagement to support one another and promote long-lasting change within the family. So Ashley, it's been a couple months since we have had you with us, so we're really excited to have you joining us tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I missed you guys, so this is exciting.
We missed you too. So I'll give an outline of what we're going to cover this evening, kind of the order we're going to cover it in. So if you ask a question and we haven't gotten to it yet, it's likely we know we're getting to it. So all of your questions are really important to us. So first, we're going to talk about what is resilience, how we define resilience, how we identify resilience around us, key components of resilience, and then a 4-step process that teens and really everyone can use to cultivate resilience in their own life. So throughout the evening, we will be incorporating some videos from our Resilience Mental Wellness Toolkit. So our mental wellness toolkits are e-learning resources that we have developed over the past year that are available for anyone really who works with teens. So our school partners use them, as well as community organizations that work with teens. And we've also had parents and homeschooling parents reach out and use them as well. And so our first 4 topics that we've developed are life transitions, stress awareness, resilience, and then our 4th in development is mental health awareness. So that's where the videos come from that you'll see tonight. And we're just about to launch our Resilience Toolkit. So you guys are getting a sneak peek that not many people have seen yet of these videos. So without further ado, Ashley, let's kick it off with what is resilience and how we're going to define it. I know if folks have done their own reading on the topic, they may see some different language depending on what you read and different thoughts on cultivating resilience. So let's kind of define it how we're going to talk about it tonight.
Absolutely. So yes, in prepping for this, unlike many of the other ones we've done, there's a lot of evidence, based research that we can look at. There's a lot of studies that are done. There's certain diagnoses that, we just have a lot of data, where resiliency is really kind of a philosophical idea and subjective. And it's very timely because I think we have all come out of a pandemic for the past 18 months or so. And, we're in the process, and we're really recognizing how we are resilient through a lot of adversity. So I'm glad we're bringing this up today. And I think maybe if you have questions, we can kind of talk about it from that frame as well. But so for the first question, I pulled a couple definitions. One, Webster Dictionary, right? The go-to. And they define resiliency as an ability to recover or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And I'm going to pick on Webster a little because the word easily, I do not like it. Nothing about bouncing back from a challenge or adversity would be easy. Whether it's a kid that's struggling with a traumatic life event or a loss or anxiety or depression, a lot of times when you're in that, the ability to transition easily is a foreign concept, and you're sitting in the middle of the forest and you got to see the forest through the trees. And that's really like part of resiliency. I'm in it. How am I going to get out of it? How I'm going to conquer it? And that takes a lot of these 4 steps that we're talking about towards the end of the presentation, being able to make meaning of it in the long term. And so with that being said, easy just really doesn't sit well with me when it comes to resiliency. However, I would say that maybe some people adapt a little bit better than others, which then leads me to the American Psychological Association, the APA's definition of resiliency, which is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. So what they're saying is it's a process, again, of being able to adapt to whatever challenge that comes your way. And you do that with thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and your thoughts, feelings, behaviors have to be adaptable to the given situation. So in pointing this out, I love this definition because it speaks to flexibility and adjustment. And that's why resiliency can be so difficult, because if you think about it, you have a negative life event or life experience, what often happens? People might struggle with feeling anxious because they're out of control, or struggle with depression because they're sad, or they lack motivation or energy to be able to pull themselves out of these moments. That's where the difficulty of being able to be flexible really comes in. And there's 3 things that APA defines that can really help support that process. It's the ways in which individuals view and engage in the world. So that'll speak to positive relationships, what we'll talk about later. Are they glass half full kind of people? The availability and quality of social resources. So, do you have a lot of things at your disposal to be able to get you out of a negative life event or see things in a more positive way? If I struggle with adversity and then I'm kind of kicked over and over and over again, and I try to pull myself back up and there's another negative life event, that's going to really be difficult being able to speak to your resiliency or even see the world in a glass half full kind of way. And then specific coping strategies. And those are unique to really anyone and any individual that really speaks to them. And we'll talk a little bit about coping strategies when we talk about self-care later this afternoon. So one of the other things that I just wanted to share a little bit with the definitions, there is a book. So if you want more of an applicable understanding, whether it's for you and your teens, regarding a good definition for resiliency, it's actually a children's book by John Cena, the wrestler. And it's called Elbow Grease. And it's basically related to these monster trucks. And, one's the smartest one, one's the fastest one, one's the one with the most grit and kind of the adventurous one, one's the most strongest one, and then there's Elbow Grease, and he's the littlest one, and he has a little bit of all of those traits, but he's the one that ultimately wins the race and perseveres through adversity as it comes. So it's a really good example for kids and adolescents of like, you have to have gumption. They use that word in the book a lot, gumption. You have to have this grit to kind of pick yourself back up and try again. And when you kind of, the adversity comes or you do feel like you're kicked down, how can you pick yourself back up? So that's a good definition. And Elbow Grease is a really good example.
So nature versus nurture. Let's talk about that for a minute. So is it genetic? Is resilience something that's genetic, or is it environment, or like?
Yeah. So
for everyone.
Yeah. So the APA reports that it can be cultivated and developed. So I would argue that everybody has the ability and the potential to be resilient. It is in us, but it's related to your environmental factors, and it is a learned behavior. And some of that kind of go back to when prepping for this, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she said back, years ago, we were hunters and gatherers, and everybody had to go out and forage for their food. They didn't have electricity. If you didn't get your food and you weren't able to gather, you couldn't eat. You couldn't take care of your family. There was really, truly, you were in survival mode all the time. And the option wasn't, it was survive or bust. It wasn't, oh, I'm having a hard time. I'm just going to lay here. I'm having a hard time. I can't persevere. It's too hard. It's really hard, but I don't have another option but to succeed. And so I think that really speaks to me of like, there is a learned behavior and you have to have like no other option but success. So I want to kind of pose to other people, and maybe you can put it in the Q&A or in the chat, or if you want to kind of raise your hand, Haley can help with that. Is that different in today's society? And Susan, do you think, maybe we can help. Is that a little bit different in today's society? And I might argue, yes.
Yes. Well, and I think even generationally, when we think about generations that, have had to tackle some, like you think about like the greatest generation, we think about, World War I and World War II, and, what our grandparents, went through, and the Great Depression. And it really in their lives was more, you just have to, you don't have any options. It's really hard, and you have to make it work. And I think even, if you look back 50 or 100 years ago, so many more people were farming, or small family farms than we are today. We go to the grocery store, we get our food, and it's really easy. And there's, but being a farmer is really hard. You can lose your crop to the weather. You have to rely on your community. And communities were arguably more close-knit 100 years ago than today. So I agree.
Yes, absolutely. And and speaking with that, how do we foster this idea of like, you must do, like, there's no option other than survival now, like this kind of, we have to do it or bust attitude. I think really it speaks to like, setting boundaries and setting clear expectations for your kid, that the option isn't you are going to give up, or the option isn't we're going to fail and not try again. And that really comes with speaking to the language and modeling like appropriate behavior. If you don't quit, if you have a hard time, that's okay to have a hard time. That's okay to like make a mistake. It's okay to fail. But what are we going to do from that? You need to feel it. You need to identify it within yourself. You need to feel it, and then you need to conquer it. And then show so much immense amount of pride and praise when they do. I had an individual who I adore come into my office today, and she's a parent and I'm a parent. And she said, I think we're soft on our kids. And I was like thinking about it as I'm driving in, like, we are kind of soft on our kids, but I want to be very kind to us as parents, that there's a lot that comes in flux in the world today, or like that we see that could be dangerous or scary. And we want the best for our children because we love them more than anything. So and we have the resources to protect them in a very different way than I think we have, like, historically. So our natural, like, innate instinct is, oh my gosh, I'm really scared. I'm really anxious. I'm worried for you. I want to protect you and keep you safe. But it's like when little kids or toddlers, right? They fall down. If you run and go, oh my gosh, are you okay? The baby's going to cry. Or if like you're running and they fall down, you go, oh, you're cool. You got it. Pick yourself back. They're less likely to cry. And that's what I think we're doing with our children, because we're anxious about the world. The world is a lot scarier than I think we knew previously. And we're experiencing it in a different way than it was before. It's harder in some ways. And I think we're kind of more of a predisposition to protect our children in a way where maybe they don't need to be protected.
Well, that makes me think of, if we're soft on our kids, the fact that I started babysitting when I was 11. And granted, it was like a couple houses down and my parents were home. It was a very controlled situation, but I was 11 alone by myself in a house down the street with someone's children. And, we don't do that today. We also don't give our kids, I think, sometimes the level of responsibility that we have generationally passed.
Absolutely. Can I speak to somebody who wrote in the chat? Can I share what they wrote?
Yeah.
Everybody wobbles in life. I love it. That's why I want to speak to this. Everybody wobbles in life, and most of the youth with whom I work have extreme difficulty accepting and embracing the wobble. And that is so incredibly true. But if we don't let them wobble and let them like feel what that feels like to wobble, and then say, you know what, you can conquer it, and really drag them along through that. I'm not going to say, hey, pick yourself back up, you're fine, but I'm going to drag you along while you're wobbling, and I'll be there every step of the way, and I'm going to be your cheerleader. I'm going to help you through it, and we're going to get through this together. And then really praise at the end that like you persevered, you conquered, help them and teach them how to make the meaning. They've never experienced, they wobble, and then they've never experienced the positivity that can come from that. It's like, I wobble and then I feel bad. Well, then I don't want to wobble anymore. I just don't want to do it. I want to like avoid it. So I love that you wrote that. Thank you.
Yeah, that was really good. So I'd like for everybody to think about a time that you experienced adversity in your life, and take a minute, maybe jot it down if you have some paper. and think about how it affected you and how it shaped you in a positive way. And if anyone, keeping in mind that we are recording, if anyone is comfortable sharing an example, you can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. But I would challenge everyone that even if you can't maybe think of it right now in this moment, that resilience is all around us and we have all been resilient in our lives. And it's important to be able to identify that for ourselves. And also, in a little bit, we're going to talk about helping our teens identify resilience all around them. And I know, Ashley, you have an example.
I do. So my mom has worked, who I'll toot her, and she's wonderful. She's worked for over 40 years at MCV VCU Childhood Cancer Clinic with pediatric oncology patients. So from a very young age, I grew up, understanding that there's a finality to life and that kids struggle, but they also really, really persevere, and they're way more resilient than I think that we give them credit for. But throughout our time there, there's a video that they show often, and it's children who have had and young adults who have had cancer from a very young age all the way up through middle school and high school, and they share their journey and what the struggle was. And one of the questions in this video is, finish my sentence in one word: cancer blank. And overwhelming, it was like probably 15 different kids in this video. Cancer sucks and it's terrible and we hate it and it stripped us from a lot. But after that statement, an overwhelming majority of the kids in this video share, I wouldn't have changed a thing. I wouldn't have taken it. I would have not had cancer because I grew from it. I learned more about myself. I learned that I could conquer anything. I formed better relationships with my parents. I was recognized that there's kindness in the world and people do want to love you and support you. I gave like a more bigger meaning to my life, and I appreciate things a lot more than maybe I would have. I don't know what life would have looked like without it. So, I've had to accept it, and thus my life is so great now. So, I think it's such a testament to really like the example that resiliency is a process. And I'm sure when they were in the middle of it, it sucks and it was scary and it was terrible and it was traumatic. But once they get out of it and they experience this like moment of survival and recognize like, wow, I got through all of that and I'm okay. Like, how does that make meaning? And it looks at like what happened to me, right? They have more self-awareness than probably anybody. What happened to me affects and shapes who I am physically, emotionally, psychologically. And then I can have a sense of purpose that's greater than probably many of us have experienced.
I think that that's so true, not just for kids who have experienced cancer, but I've in the past with another job worked with adults, and folks whose children had cancer, but it's a really common thing to hear from cancer patients. And it's a great example of resiliency. And not something that, of course, they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy, but to be able to find something positive from that experience at the end of the day.
When it's applicable to, I think, sorry, Susan, but individuals who struggle with anxiety and depression. And over time and time again, I have individuals who come in and they come in for a little bit and then they have a developmental milestone and they come back. But one of the biggest components of them, there's one individual in particular that probably is the definition of resiliency to me, is he comes in high school, struggles with learning disabilities, issues, very depressed, very anxious. And I joke with him, it's like, I'm going to drag you through this, whether you want to or not. And that was, 17, 18, and now he's 25 and he's drug himself through it. He got through high school. He recognized that he wasn't in a place to be able to go to college, and he accepted that. And he said, what am I going to do different? And he, applied and got his EMT and became, now is working in a hospital and, persevered through jobs he didn't like. And like, there's a piece to that of my journey is it's hard over and over and over again. But if I conquer that journey and I push through, I see those like wonderful milestones along the way. And being able to experience with somebody, wow, like, I can take a deep breath now because I conquered a baby step. And like, I know another one's coming and it's going to be hard, but like, I just conquered this one and that one is going to be even better because I've done it before and I know what that's like. And going from dragging them along to then them have their training wheels to then be able to ride the bike on their own is like, it's amazing. And everybody can do that. They just need to take the opportunity to experience it.
I love that example because it is everyday resilience. It's not, Michael Phelps and Simone Biles. And those are really important to be inspired by those people. And they're demonstrating amazing amounts of resilience. But I don't relate to that on a personal level. And I think most people don't, just in everyday life. But I love that example because it is everyday resilience. It's just like sometimes it is just plugging through the hard stuff, and getting through it. I'm going to have Haley cue up our first video called Everyday Inspiration. I think this is a great segue. So these are some local teens who go to Godwin High School. And, I love that I asked them who they see in their life as an example of resilience. And I just love their answers. So I'll let the teens speak for themselves. Is there anyone you look up to who you see as an example of resilience?
I think I would definitely look and I see my mom when I think of resilience because of many things that have just happened in the last few years. We've had some ups and downs as a family, and my mom has always been able to keep us together and really show the love that she has for us and that we have for each other when, there's very difficult things that are going on.
My mom as well, but also my grandma. She's a stroke patient, and she had her stroke way before the pandemic. But I think that in terms of speaking about the pandemic itself, my grandpa loves to walk and go outside and shop and things, and so he's obviously older, and so he's at home. My grandma's like, I can't go anywhere, right? Because I'm a stroke patient, so I can't leave the house much. So she's taught my grandpa how to enjoy things at home. And for my family, we look up to her so much, and she's found so much joy in the little things. And so I think that we've learned so much from her, and especially during this time. But yeah, definitely my grandma and my mother also. There's so much that she does that I could never imagine.
I really love that they talk about their family members, first of all, and yay, moms for the win, and grandmas too, and that they recognize that. But I think that it's so important to be able to cultivate resilience for yourself. You have to be able to see it so that you know what it is and what it looks like. And so I think that that's a great conversation to have with your teen, where they see resilience and those in their life. Yeah, Ashley, do you want to add some examples?
One of the things that really struck me with these videos is that the grandparent and the mother, they clearly did not shy away from sharing with their children that they had struggled. And I think when people come into my office a lot, particularly families, they'll be going through a lot and they say, well, I don't want the kids to know because they need to see me as a beacon of being great and I'm fine, everything's fine all the time. But what we're learning here is, parents are the best models of positive relationships and how to persevere through adversity. And these are wonderful examples. She still was positive. She still was loving. She still showed us goodness even when things were hard. Making meaning. Grandmother made meaning out of things when grandfather couldn't, and taught him how to do that. And that's just modeling in little ways for these kids how to persevere and have strength. And they file those away that. They plant the seeds, and that's pretty awesome to me. That was a cool example.
So I have an everyday example. And this is being able to let our kids fail. So kind of transitioning into how do we build resiliency in our kids? So we're doing swim team, as I know lots of people are right now, and it's just summer swim team, and most of these kids are not going to swim in college, or they're not doing year-round swim. And what would it mean, for a young swimmer to DQ, to disqualify? And what what is the result of that? Like it's it's emotionally difficult and frustrating, especially if they've been working really hard and they're really nervous and they, maybe they're competing against, a sibling or friend. There's all kinds of layered dynamics that can be going on. But what's the result of the DQ, and then what do they learn from it? And can you speak to that a little bit, Ashley?
Yeah. So I think, if they DQ, right, they're going to feel disappointed in themselves. They're going to feel like struggle. We don't know what happened. Maybe they didn't practice well enough, or maybe they're young, right? And it's like, okay, well, you did that, and I'm really bummed about that, and I'm sorry for you, and that makes me sad. But you recognize this feeling in yourself, and then the next time you do it, you're gonna like work harder, or you're gonna try harder. And it's gonna mean more when you're more successful and you do well. So it's helping them to model and make meaning. But if we then say, don't DQ, or like, don't even try, don't swim that stroke because you might DQ, we're kind of bolstering them falsely, and not giving them the opportunity to learn that they can do it. Like, I can do this. And if, as a parent, if I'm like, oh, maybe you shouldn't DQ or don't do that, what is the message? It's like, oh, you can't fail. And that then puts on pressure and increased anxiety, like, don't fail, don't fail, don't fail. And then they're like, I'm going to fail. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So a couple other kind of examples, and fostering resiliency can come at even an early age. Like, and these are just questions, like, when a kid falls off their bike, do they get back on, or is it okay to never try again? If they're playing sports and they don't really like it, or it's hard, are they required to finish out the season, or do they get the option to quit? If they made poor grades on a test, does that define them? So they're a bad student. They're not capable. They're not going to be successful. They're not going to go to college. And I'm sure these are things that kids say in their heads all the time, because I hear them in my office. Or if they do fail or they make a poor grade, does it mean that they can work a little bit harder, or they have these strengths and maybe they need to tweak these to be able to persevere, and they learn something about themselves, they make meaning about themselves? If they don't turn an assignment, is the expectation that they can turn in their assignments late forever? And this is when I think socially today, we've been given a big reprieve, and we're going to have to work on that come September. And can they turn them in late because they're disorganized and that's who they are, and it's okay? Are they expected to grow and adapt, and maybe they make the poor grade and then they learn, okay, I need to work on and improve my organizational skills, and we help them with that. So then they can learn to adapt and have flexibility and teach them how to do different. So these are just some everyday examples. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, yeah, but what if the kid is anxious or is depressed? And so often I hear in my office, they're really depressed or they're really sad. I'm scared that if I push them too much, or I'm too firm, or I challenge them too harshly, I'm gonna break them. Like they are gonna have a hard time, and they might self-harm, or they might have suicidal ideation. And that is a real fear for parents. That is I want to validate you in that concern. However, if you don't ever give them the opportunity or the expectation that they have to get out of bed and do what they're supposed to, or they have to kind of engage in the thing that scares them, they're never going to experience the pride of being able to do that. And that to me, kind of going over that hurdle and experiencing the pride is way more important, and way less damaging than never doing it and always having that internal message that I'm not capable. And then that becomes shame, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So let's talk about key components of resilience. And if you can name them and kind of give a brief overview of each one.
Mm-hmm. So self-awareness, and the goal psychologically, the idea is to be your most differentiated self. And that means like you become the most self-aware version of you. And that is a lifelong thing and a process that kind of takes decades. But the idea is over time and through experiences, you're able to gain an understanding of your character, your motives, your thoughts, and your desires. And part of that is being able to like understand, identify emotion. And that starts early on, like teaching kids and even sometimes teaching adults how to identify your feelings, being able to acknowledge and take accountability when there's a setback, being able to communicate your feelings and communicate when there's a setback. And then another one, in my opinion, and I say in my opinion because sometimes people say you got to focus on the present, and there is a huge purpose for that. But also part of self-awareness is once you get through the forest, right? And you're on the other side, being able to take a look back at what you've experienced and really kind of see it in a different lens. Think about, hey, what happened to me in that moment? What was going on for me? I was a really impulsive kid. I might have gotten in trouble a lot more. What was going on? Well, I was kind of more anxious. So I was acting out or impulsive out of anxiety. Okay, so how did I overcome that? How does that like shape who I am? Well, because I was anxious or I struggle, I learned to maybe I'm a little bit more of a control freak sometimes in things, or I worry about acting impulsively because I've had experiences where people got frustrated, that kind of thing. So really looking at what happened, what your past experiences are, and then how do you make meaning is a huge part of gaining self-awareness. The second, pillar is positive relationships. This is very, very, very important, particularly with resilience, because we are who we surround ourselves with. Are you surrounding yourself with people who are glass half full, more positive, very validating in who you are? If they're a positive individual, they're going to be much more likely to build you up and make you feel good about you rather than shaming you or breaking you down. Another big piece is, are they the importance of healthy relationships? They build you up. They make you feel good about who you are. They model healthy relationships. They model how to communicate about their feelings, how to talk about them. And part of positive relationships, I'm going to be more inclined to talk to Susan because I trust her and I know she's going to listen to me. She's going to make me feel heard and understood, validate what I'm going through. So I'll be more inclined to talk about my feelings because it's safer. There's a protective mechanism in that. And if I talk about my feelings, I'm going to gain self-awareness and then I'm going to be more resilient. And then positive relationships is praise. You can do this. You can be successful. Another one is self-care. And self-care is really the process of identifying what you need in a given moment and then giving yourself permission to take it. So I know what I need. Then I'm going to say, hey, because I need this, I'm going to take it regardless of what else I have going on. And I really use the three-legged stool analogy. If you think about it, a wooden stool, it has 3 legs. The goal is they all have to be equal to be balanced. So for my example, my 3-legged stool is work, my family and, personal family life, and then self-care, right? If I'm having a really hard day and I know I'm working way, way, way too much and too hard, my stool is not balanced. So I'm probably going to have to give a little bit more of self-care, whether it's family time or personal individual time. And then you have to kind of explore, identify where is there that need. And it's a constant inventory. Self-care should be daily, like a daily reflection, a daily inventory. And part of that then ultimately leads to greater sense of self-awareness. And then the last one, and this is the most important one, is finding meaning and purpose, like really making sense of the adverse experience or the negative experiences that you've come through. And what is your story, your new narrative of the bad situation? How did it shape you in a positive way? Cancer sucks, but I wouldn't change it because X, Y, and Z. That's the making meaning. And that's the part that brings a lot of value.
Thanks, Ashley. So a lot of these are really big and they're like lifelong things that we all work on. And a lot of times we don't see that meaning and purpose until we're looking back on something. So we don't necessarily experience that meaning and purpose or awareness in the moment that we're going through an adverse event. And so I'm going to ask Haley to queue up our Everyday Resilience video, which is Ross, who is 25, and he's going to talk about an experience he had when he was in middle school. And then, as a 25-year-old looking back on that, how he sees that experience today. What experiences in your own life have provided opportunities to cultivate resilience? Can you share a little bit about a challenging life event you experienced in middle school?
Yeah, definitely. 4 years of it. So, there's a lot to pick from. Middle school is hard, I think, for everybody. But I was bullied a lot in middle school. I know everybody, I think, is bullied to some extent in middle school, but I was definitely picked on a lot. Not to get into too much detail, but basically there was a group of guys who kind of made it their mission to ruin my life so much and spread all these rumors that basically resulted in me losing all of my friends. And so I was stuck at this school alone with no friends for a couple years. And it was definitely the most lonely that I've felt in my entire life. I'd never been taught about mental health awareness or depression or anything. And so feeling a lot of these feelings of loneliness and anger and frustration and sadness with nobody or no context to process it in was really, really difficult. The positive of that situation, again, when you're in a situation like that, it's impossible for you to say, like, I'm really excited that I'm going through this because I think it's going to make me stronger. You're like, no, this stinks. I hate not having friends and feeling this way. I want to feel better. But looking back, I don't know. I learned a lot about friendships and focusing my energy on the relationships that build me up the most. Learned a lot about not putting my self-worth into what other people think about me, because that's incredibly fragile. And as soon as I start hearing rumors and gossip about what other people think about me, that crumbles my self-confidence. And so I learned a lot about a lot of different things. And if I were to go back and tell my middle school self something while being in that place, I think I would encourage myself that the lessons that I was learning through that really difficult time were going to positively affect me forever. To this day, I think I cherish friendships more. I think my relationships are more special because I cherish and put so much focus into the ones that I really care about. I think it's really encouraging. It's something that if I could go back and tell my middle school self something, I'd say, this is a tough situation, but the things that you're learning here, the resilience that you're building is going to go with you forever. And that's something that, is really positive.
I think that Ross hits on all of those key components. He finds meaning and purpose in his experience. He has an awareness, of what happened and why and what he learned from it and how it's affected him positively. He, focuses on positive relationships in his life and really cherishes them. And I really liked what he said about not letting what other people think of him affect his self-worth and crumble his feelings about himself, which I really feel like you could kind of put under the self-care component of putting yourself first and not relying on other people, what other people think of you. So I just think it's it really encapsulates all those key components. So like I said, those key components, they're big, and we work on those our whole life. And I think it's really important to have an understanding of them in order to cultivate resilience and help our teens cultivate resilience. But in building the Resilience Toolkit, I was like, those are huge. That's a lot to put into an e-learning course, that could be done in a classroom. And so, we developed this 4-step process. And it's something tangible and simple. It's simple to understand, although with many simple to understand things, the implementation, is the harder part. So I'm going to have Haley cue up the Steps to Resilience video, which really lays out what can be done today, right now, if you're going through an adverse experience. And then we'll talk about that after it plays. Resilience is for everyone. We can all increase our resilience through these 4 steps. Step 1, acknowledge the challenge, setback, or disappointment. Don't skip this step. It's important to say to yourself, hey, this hard thing happened and I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. Step 2, acknowledge your feelings. Feel what you feel without judgment. Often we don't want to feel uncomfortable emotions like loneliness or anger, and we might judge ourselves for feeling them. Emotions aren't good or bad though. They are just the feelings we experience. Acknowledge your feelings about the situation, but don't get stuck there. Move to step 3. Step 3, Think of all possible responses. This might include a negative response, numbing response, or avoiding it altogether. Then choose a positive response. Is there a silver lining? Is there one good thing that you can focus on? This doesn't necessarily mean difficult feelings about the situation are going to go away. You can be sad, disappointed, or angry about something and still choose a positive response. Step 4, stick with your positive response even when it's hard. It can be difficult to stick with a positive over time. Share with a friend, family member, or trusted adult who can help you stay on track with a positive focus. So the language we use in the 4 steps is a little different than the key components, and I want to tie those together. So as Ashley said, like finding meaning and purpose is, arguably the most important of those key components. And we encourage the like choosing of a positive response in the moment of going through something adverse and finding the silver lining or that one good thing, because that's where the meaning and purpose is going to come from. And it may take, months, or it may take years to like be able to really identify that meaning and purpose, but that's the seed. It's going to start with that choosing a positive response.
Absolutely. And I love these steps. And I think, as they were presenting, I was thinking, the kids that struggle with resiliency or lack resiliency the most are probably the ones that they get stuck in, acknowledging the setback and challenge. And it might be they're aware of it or what's going on, but it's hurts and it's so painful to look at. And then they don't share it with anybody. So when I say, like, have you talked to anybody about this? They might share it with me for the very first time, but it's, I lack, not intentionally so, but I'm not a parent. Like, I'm not somebody that they love more than anybody. I'm their therapist. So can you talk to mom or dad about this? Can you talk to a sibling? Can you talk to a trusted individual that loves you unconditionally? Not that I don't love my clients unconditionally, but, I'm not their person. Can you share it with them? Because when they do that, that decreases their own anxiety and their own challenge, and they might get a positive response from even sharing, a validating response from sharing. Might feel good or a relief to kind of not stuff it inside. And then they struggle again because of acknowledging. If you can't even share it with somebody, it's hard to acknowledge your feelings, and then you sweep it under the rug. Well, everything has to go somewhere. Feelings, thoughts, everything goes somewhere. And eventually it's externalized, or we stuff it in, and then we can't even make sense of why we, what the challenge is or the setback is or why we're having a hard time. So I think as parents, one of the most important things you can do in kind of helping cultivate these steps to resiliency is being that person or creating opportunities for them to talk to you about things that are good and bad. And if your kids have a hard time communicating their challenges and setbacks, it's painful for them, the best course of action is to share what you've experienced, share your adversities, share your setbacks, whether they're past or present, to model that it's hard to talk to. But once you do, there's a sense of relief, and then identify your feelings once you've shared. It feels really good to kind of get that off my chest, or, it's hard to talk about, but once I do, I kind of feel better, and model that for them. Because I think if you do it, they're more inclined to bond and engage with you.
We have one more video. This video is called Resilience in Action, and it is an example from right here in our community that developed in the past year. So I will just let the video speak for itself. 2020 was a difficult year. In the midst of the global pandemic, America was faced with the brutal killing of George Floyd, a Black man at the hands of a white police officer. This set off an uprising that filled our streets with voices of objection to racism in the United States. Along with protesters came vandals that left a path of destruction across the city of Richmond. The graffiti on the walls expressed feelings and demands, but in an illegal, destructive manner. Artist Hamilton Glass understood the anger and frustration being expressed in the graffiti, but believed there was a better way to communicate those emotions. He was inspired to start the Mending Walls Project. He wanted to use public art as a tool for empathy and connection. His idea was to have artists partner from different races and backgrounds to create beautiful, meaningful art together, which inspires conversations. Mending Walls has grown to over 18 murals by 33 artists, a website, a documentary, and most importantly, it has inspired countless conversations about race in a positive, productive way. Mending Walls is resilience in action. I love this example so much for so many reasons, but it's really, and one of them is that it's you can go through these steps and see, you know, how Hamilton Glass like followed these steps. You know, he acknowledged what happened, and if you know, there's podcasts of the different artists talking about. You know, how they came up with their ideas for their work of art, and I think is the last mural was Hamilton Glass was one of the artists that worked on it. And in the podcast, you know, he talks about how like it was personally hard for him, you know, when George Floyd was murdered, and he had all these feelings, you know, difficult feelings. But then he took a positive response. He chose a positive response. And he made something good out of it, and he rallied his community, you know, so there's that positive relationships piece. And then I am sure that this project has had many road bumps along the way. You know, you don't achieve something of this scale, you know, without tackling some problems along the way, but he has stuck with it. And they're in the process of, you know, making this documentary. And you know, they're now partnering with community organizations, and the artists are, you know, so the two artists pair up, and now they're working with a community organization as well. And they have these community conversations, and he truly has developed a positive response out of something that was really difficult. And it's really cool to drive around the city if you're here in Richmond and see these murals and realize what they came from. And you can go to the website and you can read the stories about each mural and the meaning behind them. And it's just, I think it's a really positive and makes me really proud to live here in Richmond.
Gave me goosebumps watching. Pretty awesome.
So we will open it up if we have any questions tonight, any maybe specific questions of things that are challenges you have with the teen that you want to help with resilience. You can either raise your hand or you can put them in the Q&A. All right, if we don't have any questions, you know, I'd like to thank everyone for being here this evening. We hope that you leave this evening with a few more tools in your toolbox to support the teen in your life. Look for an email in the coming days with a recording of this event, and it will also be available on ckgconnections.org. Thank you to Ashley Morgan Soukup for sharing your expertise and insight with us, and to Haley Dalton for helping manage the Q&A and the chat and the videos for us tonight. Our next Conversations with CKG is Angst Film Discussion on July 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So when you register for the conversation, you will receive a link to view the documentary film Angst, Raising Awareness Around Anxiety, from July 16th to the 22nd. So you can watch it at your convenience. This is a film that is not available to the public. So you can't go on Netflix or Amazon Prime and watch it because it's through an independent film company. So, but you can, when you register and you get the link, then you can watch it for free from July 16th to the 22nd. And then our conversation on July 21st will be about the film. And Ashley will be our guest expert for that conversation as well. And teens are welcomed. The movie, I believe it's recommended for 11 and up, ages 11 and up.
If you have any teens that are struggling with anxiety, please, please, please get them to watch Angst. I think it's such a good representation, and it's really going to normalize anxiety for them, that they're not alone. And then I think it's also a great opportunity to open up the door for them to talk to you about their anxiety and your experience of the movie. And it's just a good opportunity to connect on the topic. So
yeah, so we hope to see you on July 21st. Thanks again and have a great evening.